So Konglish words are Korean words that sound English, but their meanings are different from their corresponding English counterparts. I'll give you an example. A few years ago when I was teaching English, I was talking with my coworker about hiking. I told her that since coming to Korea, I've been hiking a lot, so my stamina had gotten a lot higher. She was completely shocked by this. Later, I found out that stamina actually refers to stamina in the bedroom when said in Korean. But when you say stamina in English, it just means physical endurance. Suffice to say, it was an awkward misunderstanding. Let's talk to some of my friends and see how many Konglish words they know. Let's go. Hey, what's going on? Where are you from?
I'm from Victoria, Canada. Nice to meet you.
So when you were new to Korea and you were first learning Korean, were there any Konglish words that really caught you off guard?
A skinship.
Skinship.
It just sounds weird.
What does it sound like to you?
I don't know.
Like a ship made out of skin?
It just sounds like something out of like a horror movie. Anything with skin, it's just weird.
So how would we say that naturally in English? Physical contact, I guess?
Touchy-feely, that's good.
Yeah.
Or just intimacy.
Okay, how about muffler?
Yeah, I know muffler.
What is it?
This is like a scarf.
Yeah, so we would just call it scarf, right?
I'm half Korean, my mom's Korean. She would use muffler.
Really?
Yeah. So I thought that was an English word.
All right, next one. Punk.
Like if you got a flat tire, that's a punk.
Oh, he's good.
Yeah.
펑크 났어?
Yeah.
Like planes fell through. 펑크 났다.
I didn't know that one.
How about hip?
When I first came to Korea with my students, they would kind of say that and then like wait for a reaction. I was just like, what? Hip. There's no problem.
What's the problem? Hip. Yeah.
Because in English, a hip is like the bone right here.
Yeah.
But in Korean, the hip is like the full-on gluteus maximus, right?
Booty.
Yeah, the booty.
Big booty.
Yeah.
So are you a hip man?
Hip 좋아요.
힙 좋아요?
that
싫어하지 않죠? Okay.
How about 패스? That's another Konglish.
Pass. Next. And what are you doing these days?
These days, I have been doing highlocal.com. This is an events platform. So anyone who wants to host an event, they can, and I will support you to host the event.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, how's it going? Where are you from?
I am from the lovely city of London in the UK.
So while living here, has there been any words that have shocked you or you've been taken aback by hearing these words?
I think the one that stands out to me the most is handupon.
핸드폰.
Handupon, yeah. In the UK, we'll say like mobile phone or just mobile. When you're younger, when you're pretending to call people, you would use that hand gesture. So that's a hand phone.
체크 쇼트.
Check shots. See, when you said checker, I was thinking like check card. Is it to do with drinking? Is it to do with sports?
No, it's like a checkered pattern shirt.
Of course, like checkered shirt. Yeah.
Meeting.
So I know this one.
Do you?
Yes. So this one is to do with dating.
Yes.
So like you come together for a meeting.
Yeah.
Like so you're meeting up with people.
It's like 3-on-3.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's a
what would
meeting.
we say in English?
Group date. I would
group
say.
date. Oh,
Group
okay.
date.
That's a good way to say it. Cunning.
My students use this a lot.
Yeah.
Because they say, "Oh, teacher, that person, he's cunning.
Yeah.
But it's actually to me like to cheat.
Yeah.
Like to cheat on a test.
Yeah.
They would say things like, he has cunning paper. We would say something like maybe a cheat sheet.
Yes, a cheat sheet.
Yes.
Yeah. Well done. Cream pasta.
Pasta with white sauce.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
What would we say?
Pasta and cream sauce, we'd probably say.
So maybe even similar. That's actually
yeah,
a
yeah.
pretty similar one. Yeah.
Pretty much. That's why like I kind of worked it out.
Yeah. One shot. This one's easy.
Yes, to have one shot of drink.
What would you say?
In the UK, maybe we'll go like down it.
We would say bottoms up.
Oh, okay, yeah.
비닐.
Binil? That one's thrown me. Binil?
Like you want a good hint?
Oh, yes, please.
비닐봉투 하나 드릴까요?
What kind of bag is it? Is it a recyclable bag?
Plastic.
So just plastic bag.
Vinyl, 비닐.
Oh yes, vinyl. Yes, just plastic bag.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What do you think about Konglish?
It's interesting because like English is a language that evolves.
Yeah.
It's a living language. I'm not one of those people who get really snooty. It's like, oh, you can't say it like this. You have to say it like this because every country has its own way.
English does the same thing.
Exactly. I mean, the language itself borrows from different languages anyway. Right. German, French, Japanese, Native American, whatever. I like to see different countries' takes on the English language, and sometimes we just may take it upon ourselves as well. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Hey, what's going on? Where are you from?
I'm from Texas in America.
How long have you lived in Korea?
About 3 years now.
So I'm going to give you some words, and you tell me what you think they mean. Pablo.
Pablo?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never heard that, I don't think.
Trench coat.
Trench coat, sure. Yeah, like the trench coat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Pablo. So Pablo man is the guy who has the trench coat. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I know that.
Let's go to the next one. Night.
Night? Like nighttime or like a knight in shining armor?
Nope.
What is it?
Nightclub. It's different, right? We would just say club or nightclub, right? Consent.
Like consent?
Consent.
Like it sounds like consent in English, but
You're not
like,
gonna get it.
No, I'm not.
It's like an outlet for a plug.
Oh, like a console. That's weird. It's
Yeah.
just like a plug.
Yeah, it's the outlet.
Outlet.
Yeah. Driver.
Like a driver? What?
Screwdriver.
Oh. But I feel like they would have to have like the screw in front of it. Screwdriver. Like,
Screwdriver.
yeah, then I would know.
But screwdriver you can say for the cocktail name. Screwdriver 하나 주세요.
Oh, okay. I don't order screwdrivers, so.
It's orange juice and vodka. Very
yeah,
simple.
It's too sweet.
Open car.
Open car? Like carpooling or something?
No.
No, I don't know.
Convertible.
Oh,
With the
Convertible.
With the top down.
how like open? Okay, like reclining, like going back.
Yeah.
Okay. I better get studying.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. So in a recent video of mine, I got a ton of comments of people telling me to wear a mask. Despite the fact that I was filming literally outside of my house, I got a lot of these comments. But I actually think this level of caution is a good thing. It is absolutely essential for everyone to wear masks while in public spaces. You see, for most Americans, when they see someone wearing a mask, to them it looks like an apocalyptic zombie movie. It looks a little scary actually. But this is quickly changing as many clothing companies in the United States are actually starting to manufacture masks. Let's see what people from all around the world have to say about this topic. Before we start though, I want to say that I made sure that everyone in this video wore a mask on their way to the interview. We only exposed our faces during the interview. Anyway, let's begin. Hi, how's it going? Where are you from?
I'm from Russia.
Hi, my name is Pascal and I'm from Toronto, Canada.
I'm from Switzerland.
I'm from America.
I'm from England.
So I think there's like a stereotype that foreigners don't like to wear masks.
Yeah.
Where do you think that stereotype comes from?
I think every time in media in America, we always see masks as like some really like crazy disease going on, or someone's really sick, maybe like in a zombie movie or something. It's never just normal to wear them in public.
I think in Russia there is still a really strong feeling of people not wanting to wear the mask.
Why is that?
They still don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
It's not a common practice in the West. Just wearing masks when you are sick is not a common practice. And I feel that like, especially in the East, it's a lot about not being a problem to someone else. Whereas in the West, we're like, I'm not a problem to me. It was always to protect you from some outward thing,
Yeah,
like
that's such a good
dust.
point. Yeah.
But here, it's to protect other people from you.
So how often do you wear masks here?
All the time.
All the time, every day?
Yeah, every day. Just only not in my home, of course.
Of course.
3-4 times a week, but like I don't go out that much.
Oh, every day whenever I go out?
I wear a mask every time I go out. Even in the gym, at school, I have to wear a mask.
Every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Every day, really. So in Seoul, if you don't wear a mask, do you feel that people stare at you? Do they silently kind of judge you, give you a little pressure?
I mean, I silently judge people not wearing masks on public transport now. So, like, if someone coughs or sneezes on the subway, everybody just goes, like, who was that?
Yeah.
Where are you? And if you're not wearing a mask and you do cough or sneeze, then you do get all the looks.
People are like, this mother...
Yeah, I mean, there was someone on the subway recently who sneezed in the general vicinity that I was in, wasn't wearing a mask, and me and 2 other Koreans just kind of looked at him. The subway doors opened and all of us just went, "내리세요." Like, please leave.
Oh.
Because you're not supposed to get on the subway currently, or if you're not wearing a mask.
Yes, sure. Sometimes like it's dirty, so I want to buy a new one, and I don't have a mask just for a few minutes, and I feel they look at me.
I did forget to wear a mask once when I went to the convenience store. I just didn't think about it, and I saw people like looking at me, being like, "What the hell? Why are you outside without mask?" And I was so pressured.
Stressed,
yes. The reason why I'm wearing the mask is just to ease people's feelings, because people are like really stressed when they obviously see you without the mask.
Yeah, but it's become really like a polite thing to do.
Yes.
Even.
Every time I see someone who's not wearing a mask in Korea, well, of course, not everyone, but they feel like they're the one coughing the most, which is kind of funny. But yes, I feel like if I don't wear a mask, or if anyone doesn't wear a mask, pretty much everybody stares at you or maybe avoids you a little bit.
Any idea these days in the US, has this changed at all? This perception of masks?
Everyone wants masks now, I think, and I think it's definitely changing now. It's like foreigners who come here with their culture, they're maybe not used to the masks, so it could seem kind of really strange, but something we just have to do,
Okay.
I feel like the perception about masks in Canada, maybe even the States, has been changing recently.
I think so too.
Yeah, and they're thinking like, maybe it's better if everybody wore a mask.
Yeah. We're gonna play a game. It's called Mask or No Mask. And I'm gonna describe the situation. You tell me
Okay.
if you're gonna wear a mask or you're not gonna wear a mask. You're at home and you open the window. Wear a mask or no mask?
No mask.
You're at home, you get a package in front of your door and you open the door and pick up the package. Mask or no mask?
No mask, but disinfect the box.
Okay. You throw trash outside. Mask or no mask?
No mask.
From your house, no mask. You go to the 편의점 near your house. Mask or no mask?
Mask, for sure. Mask.
Okay. You go for a jog. Mask or no mask?
Mask, even though it's so difficult to run with a mask.
Okay. You ride a bike. Mask or no mask?
Mask.
You go to a big concert with a bunch of... I'm just kidding.
I'm not going to the concert.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to the concert.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
You're
Bye.
welcome.
Bye. All right. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Today I'm going to talk about different stereotypes within the US. Now I know there are many different areas within the US, but in this video I'm only going to focus on 4 different areas. New York, LA, Portland, Oregon, and the American South. You might see a lot of these stereotypes depicted in songs, TV shows, or movies. Remember, everything mentioned in this video is just for fun. All of these things are stereotypes, so don't take it too seriously. Let's begin. New Yorkers have a reputation of always walking fast, living fast, and never having enough time. They're seen as always being in a rush to get somewhere. Going along with this, New Yorkers are often seen as being rude and impatient. When you're in New York, you need to get to the point and not waste time. Other stereotypes include people living in New York as being fashionable and trendy. New York is also seen as being on the cutting edge of technology and being home to many startups. Because New York is so competitive and expensive, New Yorkers are often seen as hardworking and extremely ambitious. A positive stereotype of New Yorkers is that they are thought to be very smart and quick-witted. Here are some depictions of stereotypical New Yorkers.
I'm walking here! Up yours, you son of a... You don't talk to me that way, get out of here!
People living in LA have a reputation of being laid back, health conscious, and superficial. Organic is all the rage in LA and people love eating only the highest quality food. Going along with this, since LA is so close to the beach and the weather is so warm, many people in LA are borderline obsessed with fitness and taking care of their bodies. Surfing is also a very popular hobby here. There is definitely a stereotype of the people being obsessed with their appearance. Plastic surgery is quite popular in LA. Since Hollywood is in LA, it is said that you can't go to a cafe or restaurant without finding a waiter who's actually an aspiring writer, director, or actor. There are definitely a lot of struggling artists in this city. Here are some stereotypical depictions of people from LA.
Hi, I'd like to order the kale salad. I hope it's hand-picked outside, and I need to feed my rabbits at home.
Since Portland, Oregon is also on the West Coast, it shares a few similarities to LA. Portland is seen as the hipster capital of the US. Everyone bikes everywhere, has tattoos, and loves going to cafes to drink fair trade organic coffee. Since there is a lot of nature surrounding Portland, people are seen as being obsessed with nature and always hiking and camping. People living in Portland are sometimes seen as pretentious and often pontificating. Here are some stereotypical depictions of people from Portland, Oregon.
Bro, where'd you get that hat?
Thrift store.
Really?
Well, like the vintage thrift store?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was $72.
The South is unique in that there isn't one city in which I can focus on, but rather an entire area of the country. Southerners are thought of as being extremely polite, religious, and conservative. Country music and NASCAR are often associated with the South and are indeed very popular. Some negative stereotypes of Southerners are that they are racist, gun-touting bigots who live near or on a farm. I personally think this is inaccurate, but you can often see this stereotype depicted in TV shows and movies. Here are some stereotypical depictions of people living in the American South. So that's all for today's video. What do you guys think? Do you like these kind of videos? Thank you so much for watching. I'm Sean. See you next time. This is kind of a different topic, but I'm curious as to what you think. Japanese people and Korean people, to some extent, really struggle with English.
Yeah.
And I was an English teacher here for 3 years, and I see how well they take tests and how well they study. They're not lazy, they're not anything like that. There's no problem. No. But more than other countries that are really even close by, like Malaysia, the Philippines,
right?
A lot of these other countries, they really struggle with speaking. And I'm really trying to understand, like, why is there such a struggle with speaking? Especially in Korea, and I think Japan's probably they have the hardest time too.
Well, I think there are a number of things. I think, for one, there is this perception that in Korea and Japan that their culture is so unique. So they love to tell you that their language is the hardest language to learn, which is part of this whole complex. We're the most unique, our language is the most difficult. That's not an ideal attitude to have when you want to learn the language. When you want to learn a language, it's like, I'm me. I'm not Japanese, not Korean, not Canadian, not American. I'm just this person learning a language. I can learn any language. I'm not unique. I'm going to throw myself into that other culture. So there's a bit of an attitude thing. Also, I think both katakana, especially katakana, but even hangul, actually inhibits them from pronouncing correctly because they are far too influenced by their own sort of phonetic script that tries to say this is how this is pronounced. Well, it's in fact not pronounced the way it's written in Hangul, and that's going to leave you with a Korean pronunciation. It's even worse with kana, because kana is a syllable-based writing system. So that's a problem.
That's so interesting. When I was an English teacher, I remember I had to scold some of my students because they kept trying to memorize the pronunciation by writing Hangul under the English. And I kept telling, no. You're going to get really bad habits if you do that. But they kept doing it because they're 10 years old and they thought they figured out some kind of hack, this shortcut to get the right answer. But
it's even bad for speakers of in any language, okay?
Yeah,
so
if you do it in English, it's
Anna, who's Spanish. So she comes across a word, S-W-O-R-D, sword. I say, Anna, listen to it. It's not sword. It's sword. You have to listen to how it's being pronounced. Don't be influenced by how it's written. And many people would say, word, they'll pronounce ward. Sword and ward. Makes sense, no? Sword, sword, and a word is a ward. So you can't be influenced by the writing system. So even non-English speakers are influenced by how, the value of the Latin alphabet in their own language. But for the Koreans and the Japanese, it's even worse. So forget it. Listen. Get a sense of the rhythm of the language, the intonation of the language. Use the text-to-speech if you're looking at it online. Don't rely on Hangul, and don't even rely on romanization. Hear it.
Hangul and hiragana and katakana are so phonetically accurate. Like, you can read it
for their own languages.
Right. So you can read it and know how to say that word in Korean or Japanese.
Right.
So they get into the habit too. I think a lot of the students I've taught, they see an English word and like, okay, I know how to pronounce it. Teacher, how do I say this combination of letters? And I'm like, well, actually, it's thought. It's not good to, It's, and they're like, wait, but teacher, I thought there was a G. I'm like, yeah, well, English is kind of hard.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and I know the Koreans are very proud of Hangul, but Hangul is great for Korean, but it has a limited range of, like every language every language has a limited range of sounds.
Yeah.
Korean and Japanese have a particularly limited range of sounds.
Yeah.
So if English has, I don't know, 45 phonemes, Korean and Japanese have 35 phonemes. So their writing system will only accurately represent the phonemes that are in their language.
Yeah.
And with Hangul, you can't it was designed for Korean. So if you have vowel sounds, diphthongs, things that don't exist in Korean, the Hangul is not going to do it.
So what do you think Malaysians and people in Hong Kong and people in the Philippines,
yeah.
what are they doing so well? Do you have any thought about this?
Yeah, I mean, you can't compare because Malaysia was a British colony. Hong Kong was a British colony.
That's true.
But even in Hong Kong, their English is worse than in Singapore. In Singapore, they're even better because it's an official language.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's cheating.
But the Philippines, they had the Americans there for so long, and so it's not culturally. It's not the same. It's not the same. But put it this way: there are people that I have met in Japan, in Korea, in China, who have never left those countries, who are flawless in English.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to do with being Korean.
No, absolutely not. I just meant like the education system.
That's right. So you have to do a lot of listening. You have to do a lot of reading. Read novels, listen to audiobooks, really invest in that listening to where you can enjoy it. And there is an emotional side of it. Like you have to listen to stuff that you enjoy so that you want to be part of it. So it's music to you. And you have to catch the intonation of the language. And this is the way I approach my Korean. I say, listen, I want to get that intonation. I want to get that intonation. So you got to hear it. And you have to notice. I mean, I often mention the case of my father. My father, he grew up in Czechoslovakia. So in Canada, we have a province called Nova Scotia, and we have a Bank of Nova Scotia. Scotia, Scotia. My father can pronounce she. He can make the sound sh. But to him, Nova Scotia is Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, because it's TIA. He cannot break the mold, the hold that, maybe back if you're Czech and you read TIA, it's TIA. So he's not paying attention. So you have to pay attention. It's Scotia, Nova Scotia. That's how people say it here. Right? And he spoke English very well, and he lived in Canada till he died, 30 odd years. It was always Nova Scotia.
He's from Czech Republic?
Well, in those days, he was born in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Oh, wow.
But then became Czechoslovakia in 1918.
Yeah.
But he came to Canada in 51.
So he spoke English really, really well. Yeah.
Really had a phenomenal vocabulary. He was the champion in Scrabble, all this stuff. But there's certain things that people have to listen. They have to pay attention. They have to listen. Yeah, and the Hangul doesn't help them. And nor does the hiragana, katakana doesn't help them in Japanese.
That's really interesting. I was talking with Matt from Matt versus Japan. We were talking, and it's interesting how easy it is to learn Hangul.
Right.
But it actually inhibits you in the later levels. You actually mentioned that because you can't guess the Hanja. But also in the pronunciation when you're learning another language, and Hangul is your first language, and you're so married to Hangul, it can be really difficult to learn the new set of pronunciation with the Western languages like English, for example.
Well, you have to forget Hangul. And I would say I don't use romanization. If I go to learn Korean, if I go to learn Arabic, I really don't spend much time like in Korean. First of all, they have a romanization system for Korean, which is just ridiculous. Like
it's so bad.
It's so bad. Like who did that? Only professors at a university who could come up with a system like that. It's completely misleading. Okay, but the sooner you get on, I'm learning Korean. I get on to Hangul. And how do you pronounce that? Well, I keep listening and so that because you want to get to the point where. So if I'm reading Korean. Of course, when we read in a foreign language, we're sub-vocalizing. So I like to listen and listen and listen and then read what I've been listening to. So then all of the listening gives me momentum so that when I am reading and sub-vocalizing, reading to myself, I'm getting close to the correct pronunciation.
So smart, yeah.
Yeah, that's what you got to do. And leave the romanization aside. And similarly, Korean people who are learning English, forget the Hangul, listen to it and get to a point where you can sub-vocalize in English and sound, like the native speaker. So you listen to a bit of content, hopefully something you like, and somebody's voice you like, and then you read it, and you're the guy, you're the narrator.
Yeah.
And forget Hangul. It's not going to help you.
That's so funny. I remember, I think I'm riding like the subway or something, and like these two guys approached me and they're like, "Oh, can you speak Korean?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Well, we have this pamphlet for you. It has the English translation just in case." I look at the pamphlet and there's the romanization of all these famous Korean cities, and I'm like, what does this say? Like,
I know, it's impossible.
Then the Hangul is next to it. I'm like, oh, that's so much easier to read.
Get on
so
the writing system and stay with it. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, I think that was amazing, Steve. All right, anybody who's interested in Steve and what he's doing some amazing things. Definitely follow his website, follow his YouTube channel. I'll link it all down below.
Super. Okay, great. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It's always fun to get to connect with language enthusiasts wherever they are.
Yeah, right on.
And your Korean is amazing.
Oh, thank you. So far to go, but anyway, yeah. All right, Steve. I hope to see you again. And
all right, super.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye-bye.
I'm here today again with Matt from Matt vs. Japan. How you doing, Matt?
Hey guys, I'm Matt. I run the YouTube channel Matt vs. Japan.
So we're going to talk today about the foreigner experience in Korea versus Japan. How different is it, and what are the similarities? So Matt, you have experience living in Japan, right?
Yeah. When I was in high school, I spent 6 months living in Japan. I was going to a Japanese high school, and there were 3 foreign teachers at my high school. From my point of view, there was kind of 2 different categories. There was the foreigners who really assimilated into the culture and learned the language. And then there were the foreigners who never really learned the language, and they kind of just lived in their own little bubble of other foreigners and spoke English all day. And when I say foreigners, I should probably just clarify that. I mean people from the West, in English-speaking countries or European countries, because I think it's a little bit different if we're talking about Chinese or Korean immigrants to Japan. But anyway, in my case, it seems like from what I've seen, a majority of foreigners who go to Japan, or at least more than half, never really learn the language, never really assimilate. But what about it in Korea? Is there a similar kind of distinction that you see?
Yeah, I would say that most people here, most foreigners here, do not invest and do not assimilate into the culture. They do not learn Korean. But I would say that this is a result of their temporary time spent, or contract or whatever. Maybe they're students, they're only spending 6 months here, or they're on a 1-year contract. So to that extent, it doesn't really make sense to spend too much time learning the language or getting to know the culture very deeply. I kind of understand them in that regard, but for someone like me who's been here for 6 years, amongst the people like me, I would say most long-termers do actually learn the language. Maybe they're not completely fluent, but they can have conversations. So I would say I'd give a point to the foreigners in that regard.
That's interesting. So you said a lot of people who come to Korea as a foreigner only stay for 6 months to a year?
Yeah, for sure.
And so would you say those are people who are coming for business reasons, and like their company just sent them to Korea, they didn't necessarily want to come?
That's a good question. Let's start out with our first big point here. Why do foreigners come to Korea, and why do they come to Japan? I think most foreigners come to Korea as either soldiers in the army, because this is a big difference between Japan and Korea. Korea's still at war with North Korea. So a lot of American soldiers come over. That's a big portion of foreigners. Also, English teachers are a big portion, English teachers. And I think the third biggest constituents would be students. Between these 3 groups, most of the foreigners here are definitely temporary, not long-term. 1-2 years at most. Many students are a few months. So I don't think a lot of people are here long-term. How is that in Japan?
From what I've seen, the majority of foreigners who come to Japan, I think they are English teachers, but they're not coming to Japan because they want to teach English. They're coming to Japan because they're interested in Japan and they want to experience the culture. And teaching English is just the easiest way to get a visa and get a job over in Japan. And it's something that any native English speaker can do. So it's kind of just an easy way over. Although I have seen that there's a decent amount of people who go to Japan as like a Mormon who's trying to basically spread their religion, like spread the religion of the Mormon church. And I think a lot of people go to Japan not really knowing how long they're going to stay because they have an interest in the culture and they don't know whether they're going to like it or not. So I think they just go over there. But I think a lot of people after a year or two decide that they've kind of, you know, experienced the culture and they're ready to go back home. And it's a minority of people who decide to stay there long term as well.
Yeah, that's very similar to Korea. I think most people stay here for a year or two, at least the English teachers, and then they leave. Maybe they're doing like a world tour or an Asia tour, a year in Korea, a year in Japan, a year in China. I see this a lot too. But I will add the caveat that I think similar to Japan, you could pick many countries to teach English in. You could go to Thailand, you could go to Taiwan, you could go to parts of China. I would say similar to Japan, that foreigners that do choose to come here to teach English or study, do it because they probably do have some kind of interest in Korea. And especially these days, K-pop is so dang popular. I swear, if you ask all the foreigners here, I would say a big percentage of them are very interested in K-pop. I personally am not the biggest fan. I like Korean music, but not necessarily K-pop. Yeah, I think a lot of people are here for a reason is the point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the kind of Japanese analog of K-pop is definitely anime and manga and that sort of culture. I myself also was very inspired by anime when I first became interested in Japanese, and I think a lot of people go to Japan with the idea that the world that they see in anime is what Japan is. I was kind of like that myself, so I ended up experiencing a lot of disappointment when I realized that Japan is pretty different than the world you see in anime. And I think that anime is the main cultural export that, you know, Japan really has, but we don't have in the West. And so it's something that, really draws people to Japan.
Wow, I think you could say the exact thing about K-pop. It's one of the main soft exports, cultural exports from Korea to much of Asia. It's very popular in Asia, K-pop, and to much of the West. People see these K-pop music videos and they read the blogs and the YouTube videos and they get this expectation of Korea. Everybody's beautiful, everybody's perfect. They have these amazing suits and dresses. They come to Korea and they're like, wow, there's a lot of just normal people here. I've heard that so many times. It's really funny. I bet Koreans get really frustrated. They're like, of course we're just people. Like there's all types of people here, not just the models, the Barbie dolls that you see on the music videos. You know, I thought that was going to be a big difference, but it's actually pretty similar in the way it influences other countries, you know, anime versus K-pop. I would say their demographics are not always the same. I would say a big difference though between K-pop and anime, it's just my instinct. I could be wrong, but I think anime influences both men and women, maybe men more than women. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I would definitely say that's true. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of girls who are into anime, but if you were gonna do the math, I'm pretty sure that the majority of anime fans in the West are male.
Yeah, the opposite is true with K-pop. It's predominantly women who are interested in K-pop. These huge boy bands. They do have K-pop girl bands, but I don't know that there's a lot of men screaming like, oh my god, I'm such a big fan. Like, men don't really do that, especially over the age of 20 or 30, whereas women do that more often for bands that they like.
Well, that's interesting because within Japanese culture, there's this concept of an idol and an idol group, which is pretty similar to K-pop stars, I think. But in general, they're female. Like, maybe you've heard of AKB48. It's one of the most popular idol groups where there's like, I mean, I don't know if there's literally 48, but there's many like of these girls in this idol group, and in the music videos, they're all dancing and singing. And these are very popular among guys in Japan. But I don't think that they're as popular in the West. There are definitely some people in the West who are interested in Japanese idols, for sure, but not nearly as much as anime and things like that, I think.
Okay, I want to go on to the next topic here, which is how do Koreans and Japanese people react to foreigners speaking their language? Can you start us off with the Japanese experience?
You know, we already talked about earlier in this video how most foreigners don't end up reaching a very high level of Japanese. You said in the case of Korean that people don't really invest a lot of time and energy into learning Korean because they know that they're not going to be in Korea for that very long. So maybe it's not worth their time.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I feel like most foreigners who come to Japan do try to learn Japanese, but they end up finding it so difficult that they don't really keep up with their studies. And they end up kind of dropping it after a certain point. Most foreigners in Japan, like the average foreigner, I think they can't speak Japanese very well. And so because of this, most Japanese people assume that if you look like a Western person, then you're not going to speak Japanese. And this is a completely reasonable assumption from their point of view, because it's probably true like 8 or 9 times out of 10. And also another part of it is just that depending on where you are in Japan, there might be very few foreigners. I think there just is a general stereotype like, yeah, it's impossible for foreigners to speak Japanese. Because of this, as a foreigner, if you speak just even a little bit of Japanese, even a simple self-introduction, in general, Japanese people get very excited and they will shower you with many compliments. And the interesting thing is, as you get better and better at Japanese, the amount of praise that you receive from Japanese people actually decreases, because it starts to become more like just a normal interaction, you know, like you just happen to be a foreigner, but you're just having a conversation, not, oh wow, look, this foreigner spoke Japanese.
I would say Korea is actually similar in that regard. A lot of people come here and they attempt to learn Korean. It's like, I think it's just a fantasy that people have. They go to a country, they just want to learn the language, even if they're only there for a little bit. They fantasize them like at a dinner party with a glass of wine, making jokes in like that language fluently. But the difference in Korean is like the writing system we have is really, really easy to learn, and it's very easy to learn how to read. So I think a lot of people here can read Korean. The Korean alphabet is easy, the Korean language is hard. So a lot of foreigners coming here, similarly, they do start studying and then they just kind of tapers off. They kind of fail at it and they realize it's really hard. Pronunciation, all these things, there's so much vocabulary, it's just so different, the grammar. It's similar to Japan in that regard. Especially so because of the American military, the English teachers, the tons of people from all around the world. It's such an international city, especially these days. Koreans will probably, if they see a foreigner, a non-Korean person, they will usually interact with English. The English that they know, or if they don't know any English, they'll probably walk away or try to avoid the situation. So there's kind of a misunderstanding that a lot of foreigners get here. Like they see a lot of Koreans trying to avoid them or trying to not make eye contact, where foreigners, especially as an American, it's like, wow, you're being rude. I'm trying to interact. I'm trying to be part of, you know, this group, and you guys are just kind of rejecting me. Whereas the Korean minds were like, I can't speak English. Better to not interact so I don't embarrass myself or feel shame for not speaking English well. With Korean, I've noticed that like the more you learn Korean, the more fluent you get, the more people will speak to you in Korean. The other part to that I'll say is that Koreans will usually interact with foreigners in English when they see a foreigner. But if they hear that you speak really well, your pronunciation's really good, it seems like you've studied a lot, they will pretty willingly speak in Korean just because it's easier. I find that in Korea, people tend to speak the easier language between the two people.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Japan it's very similar, where I'd say more often than not, when a Japanese person sees a foreigner, they're going to try to speak to that foreigner in English because they do have this idea that foreigners can't speak Japanese, and second of all, that all Western looking foreigners can speak English. When I was in Japan, I found that Japanese people would come up to me and just start trying to speak to me in English, I guess because they wanted to practice speaking English. And I remember thinking like, well, I'm American, so it's fine that you spoke to me in English, but what if I happen to be Italian or German and I didn't speak English very well? You know, like you shouldn't just assume that because I'm white that I speak English. And I would get kind of upset about that. There's other times where if a Japanese person, I think the kind of more bold and outgoing personality, feels like they need to talk to a foreigner but they don't speak English, they'll just speak to them in Japanese and not really worry about whether they understand or not. I think this is less common, but I have seen Japanese people with a sort of sense of, hey, this is Japan, so you should speak Japanese, and if you don't, that's not my problem. I've seen that, but I think it's more common to, just assume that the foreigner only speaks English, and because of this, I think that, like you said, it's common for Japanese people to avoid a foreigner because they're afraid that they're gonna have to speak English and they're not confident enough in their English abilities.
Thinking about it now though, it's like, it's kind of understandable, you know? Think about if you're in America and you see like a group of Thai people come to America and you know you don't speak Thai. It's not that you don't like the people, it's just that, well, maybe some of them do speak English, but it just seems like when they're all together, they're speaking Thai. They're just in their own world. Maybe I better just speak to other Americans. It'll be easier, you know? It makes sense. I don't think it's like a racist or a discriminatory thing. I think most of the time they're right. Like, most foreigners in Korea do not speak Korean. So they're probably right 99% of the time. People like me are quite rare who've lived here for almost 6 years, do speak Korean, you know, have a long-term residency visa, pay taxes like this kind of person is pretty rare.
Yeah, totally. Same thing with Japan, and definitely like to echo what you said about it being just intimidating and frustrating to try to speak to someone who doesn't speak the same language as you. Like, I know for me, when I'm trying to speak English to someone who doesn't really have a high level of English ability, there is this stress of just not knowing if they understand you or not being able to understand what they're saying. It's like trying to talk to someone through this blurry veil. And that is definitely a very unpleasant experience. So because, just like in Korea and Japan, most foreigners don't speak Japanese, and trying to communicate with someone who doesn't share a language with you is so frustrating, it's totally natural that they will just try to avoid you altogether.
Awesome. This is turning out to be a lot more similar than I thought. Now we have the slightly controversial question. Do foreigners in Japan and Korea ever feel 100% accepted by the people and or the culture, the society?
I can't answer this through experience because I've only spent half a year in Japan, but from talking to a lot of different people, I would say it's not possible to 100% assimilate, but you can get really close. And I think that most of the people who complain about Japanese people not accepting them really haven't done all the work that they could do in order to get accepted. For example, I have one friend who he works at a Japanese company. He's an American person who they do not look of Asian descent at all. They have become completely fluent in Japanese. They work at a Japanese company, and what they've said is as not only their Japanese ability, but their understanding of Japanese culture has increased over time, the treatment that they get from Japanese people has become more and more as if he was Japanese. And there's good aspects of this because he's not discriminated against, but there's also negative aspects because he's held to a higher standard. Because when you're a foreigner, in general, people cut you a lot of slack because they assume that you don't understand the culture. So even if you do something out of line, they're not going to make a big deal out of it. But as you prove your own competency, then they're going to start holding you to the same standard as everyone else. So, I mean, I think that you can get to a point where if you truly understand the culture and you've truly mastered the language, once someone gets to know you, maybe they will accept you as fully Japanese or close to it. But there's always the issue of when you meet someone for the first time, it's going to take a little bit to just get over the fact that you probably have at least a little bit of an accent when you speak and your visual appearance is not Japanese. So I think you can get close, but it's never going to be 100%.
I would say in Korea, I think it's a bit harder to become recognized as like just another person. I like what you said though, that like I think it's gonna take effort. You cannot demand respect. You have to earn respect. You have to earn recognition. Totally a fan of that. I like that idea. Definitely study the language in Korea. Definitely learn the culture. Definitely learn like what people do, like what's fun, what you shouldn't do. Like it's gonna look pretty funny if you're demanding respect to be acknowledged as a Korean, but at the same time you're going to bars, you're going to restaurants, you're talking really loudly, you're not blending in with the culture. I would say that Korea is still a little bit behind in terms of recognizing not traditionally looking Korean people who actually are Korean. There are some foreign looking Koreans here that are born with foreign parents but have grown up here. Their native language is Korean, yet they still kind of are treated like foreigners in the airport or like in these types of places. It's like, oh, this is the line for Koreans, or like mixed people with like mixed parents, one's Korean, one's foreigner. It's still catching up in that regard. But I would say that you know, young Koreans are just so much more open-minded than like the older generation. I definitely agree with what you're saying though, that the more Korean you learn and the more the vibe you put out that like you've lived here for a while, you know how things work, people definitely hold you to a higher standard. I know a friend of mine who's grown up here. His Korean's phenomenal. I hear him talking on the phone to his manager and they're like, yeah, whatever. They're just talking like they're just buddies or whatever. Super natural, and like it's like, yeah, he's foreigner, but his Korean is just so up there and like he knows how things work. He's just another guy. That's definitely possible. And I think that's just human nature, you know? Of course, we're different looking, but I do want to add this one thing though. As someone who's worked in Korea as an English teacher for 3 years, I notice when I go to a new school or I start a new class, the students are shocked by me. It's just because I look different. I'm not familiar to them. And because students that young are so shocked by me visually, it just tells me that it's not a societal problem in Korea. It's not a societal problem in Japan or anywhere. It's a human instinct to just be kind of surprised or in wonder. You're curious about people who look different. I don't think that's an ignorant thing, it's just a human nature thing. And the cool thing is that as you spend time with the students or with your Korean friends, they realize that you're just another human being. So I think there's really no problem in that regard. It just takes time, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really important point. And I think that's really true.
Like Korea and Japan, they're not America. They're not this melting pot of like all different types of races. You go down the street and there's like an Italian restaurant. Across the street there's a Vietnamese restaurant. It's not as common here. So we kind of do have to be a little bit more understanding. This isn't America, you know, at least Korea, and I think Japan is the same. It's not America. It's Japan, it's Korea, and people are awesome here. It's just they're a little bit surprised at first of people who are different. And you can't demand respect, you have to earn it.
Well, another question that I think gets talked about a lot among foreigners who go to Japan is how desirable it is to try to get accepted as a Japanese person 100%. Because Japanese people are held to a very high standard societally. Like in your job and in your home life, everyone is held to a very high standard. And so as a foreigner, you do get cut a lot of slack, and this can be nice. And so the way that I view it is, for me personally, if I ever went back to Japan, which I might in the future, rather than trying to become as Japanese as I could and assimilate as much as possible, I'd more try to strike the perfect balance between enjoying the benefits I receive as being a foreigner and trying to assimilate to a certain degree, and definitely not do anything that's rude or would be a nuisance to Japanese people. I wouldn't want to disturb them in any way, but I don't necessarily think trying to be as Japanese as possible is a desirable goal.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It would be kind of weird if someone would like go to a country and just completely throw into the trash their previous culture, their previous language. And it's not only weird, it's just unrealistic. It's like no matter what I do, I'm always going to be an American because I spent over 20 years of my life in America, going to school there, taking classes in English, traveling the country with my family on road trips. It's like these cultural things you can't take out of yourself. And I think these things make you unique and beautiful. Just there's something wrong about it. Someone who would try to go to another culture and just take all of the aspects of their previous life out of their daily life, even if you're from like North Korea. Like you don't have to celebrate, the government of your old country. It's just, you do have to recognize though that that's kind of what made you who you are. So I agree to that extent that like it's not really realistic to assimilate 100%. So what has your experience been in America and in Japan, and for me in Korea, making friends with Japanese people and or dating Japanese people?
When I was in Japan, I didn't speak Japanese very well, so I found it very difficult to make friends. At first, people were very interested in me just because I was a foreigner and, I was this unfamiliar person to them. But after a while, they got used to me and they got bored of me, and they kind of just started ignoring me because I couldn't speak Japanese, they couldn't speak English, and so we couldn't really communicate. After I got back from Japan, I continued to work on my Japanese. I reached a pretty good level, and then when I went off to college, there was a lot of Japanese foreign exchange students. So I was able to make a lot of Japanese friends there. Now, it's a little bit of a special circumstance because most Japanese foreign exchange students who are in America want to learn English. And so they're very eager to make American friends. And in fact, in my experience, most of them had very similar struggles that I had when I was in Japan. Being that their English level is pretty low when they first arrive here. Most Americans don't speak Japanese, and so they're really just not able to connect with American people. So when I would approach them and say like, hey, I'm studying Japanese, like, nice to meet you, want to be friends, they would usually be just very happy, very eager to be my friend. And at the beginning, I think they would kind of just be thinking like, cool, I get to finally make an American friend. But I found that our relationship pretty quickly would move past just the fact that, I was American and they were Japanese. I mean, the topics of our conversations often would revolve around the differences between Japanese culture and American culture, just because that was the biggest thing we had in common, in a way. What about your experience?
Okay, yeah, there's definitely people in Korea that will try to be friends with you just because you're an English-speaking foreigner. Maybe they want to get to know the culture. Maybe they want to learn the language. I would say just be wary of these people. Like, of course, it's okay to be curious in other cultures, but like, you shouldn't be friends or date someone just because they're from a certain country or you want to learn a language. Like, I think you should be friends with someone or obviously date them because you like the person. And, the fact that they're Korean or American or whatever is secondary. Like, it's a nice little bonus. And then you can talk about like these cultural differences. I've seen this a lot at language exchanges where, you know, people start to be friends and then it falls apart really quickly because they only really liked each other for a language exchange. It's like trying to study out of a book for engineering and you're not an engineer. Yeah, the book's in English, but the book is just totally not relevant to you. It's just not going to help you in any way. So
yeah, well, I mean, there's kind of this fundamental conflict of interest where you want to speak Japanese or Korean, they want to speak English, and so like there's always going to be that tension there of you want to speak different languages, and of course there's that aspect of you're kind of using each other for something other than just purely friendship.
I remember I hung out with this Korean person like 4 or 5 years ago when I first got to Korea, and we were so strict about our language study that every 5 minutes we would hit a timer and we would switch the language that we would speak in. And man, did that just take all the fun out of being in the same room, you know, like studying with each other. It was just so completely systematic. It would just taken all the life out of it. And I feel like you can't really interact with people like they're textbooks. So in general though, I think Koreans, they're pretty friendly, and once you get to know a Korean person, they will bend over backwards for you and just be so kind. There's this word in Korea called jong. Jong means like taking care of your fellow human being. Anyway, if you see your friend like in another country or you see them outside, they're like, oh my god, you're here, it's so good to see you, what's up? Like, where at first like they're shy to meet you, but once they get to know you, they're amazing people. And the thing I love most about Koreans is like their sense of humor. Koreans are funny, man. Like, I think that comes from their painful history. Like they understand pain, they can understand a good joke, good humor. Like, it really resonates with me. That's one of my favorite things about living in Korea is the Korean people and like how easy they are to relate to once you get to know them. Like, you can make fart jokes here and they'll laugh. You can make like highbrow, like more intellectual jokes. You can have these conversations. Koreans are smart, man. So like the girl I'm dating now is Korean and she's just great. We can have all these conversations. My other Korean friends, they're great. Of course, there are not great people, but once you get past that barrier of, oh, we're different, we look different, okay, what language can we speak? Okay, there's no problem here, I think, making friends. Although I can understand how it could be intimidating for someone coming here and they're new here, they don't have any connections. But I think you could say that about anybody in any city. Yeah, like in London or Madrid or, you know, New York even. If you don't know anybody there, it's gonna be hard to make friends at least at first. So yeah.
Yeah. That's why when I go to Japan, if I go to Japan again, I think I'm gonna try to make friends through some sort of hobby unrelated to learning languages. Like maybe I'll start learning Japanese chess, and I'll go to like a kind of Japanese chess dojo, and that I think that'd be a great way to meet people, and also to meet people who aren't going to be interested in you just because you're a foreigner or because you speak English or something.
It's a fantastic idea, right? So you're friends because you share this hobby, and then you connect through the language of Japanese probably, and then you can kind of throw in, you know, little side conversations of cultural differences. But they're not the main focus. You know, the main focus is this hobby, and then you two as people, and how well you ping pong conversation and jokes, chemistry and all that. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Go to these hobby groups. Yeah.
The only thing is that you have to be at a pretty decent level for that to work. So there's that. Yeah. But I mean, I think ultimately during the language learning process, you can make some more superficial friends to help you learn the language. But yeah, I think your goal should be to get to that level where you can go and make friends and connect over something other than just the fact that you're from a different culture.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I would say don't throw out the entire possibility of meeting someone just because they want to study language with you. Like, you could have an amazing language partner. I've had many amazing language partners. We've helped each other. We've asked each other questions. That could be a great relationship. I guess you're right. I shouldn't speak in extremes and just throw out the baby with the bathwater. You're totally right in that regard. So far, this has been a really interesting conversation, Matt. Is there anything else you want to add about this topic as a whole?
I'll just say that although I have spent like close to 10 years engaging with Japan and Japanese in some form, I've only spent 6 months actually living in the country. So if I said anything that is inaccurate or has a mistake in it, I apologize for that.
Yeah, I'll say though that you definitely interact with Japanese culture daily. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, through the internet and through Japanese people. I mean, recently it's been, there's the pandemic, so I haven't been able to hang out with people in person. But before that, yeah, I had Japanese friends who lived near me. So yeah, I think I am able to interact pretty meaningfully with Japanese culture.
All right, Matt, that was a really interesting conversation. I guess we'll conclude with that. Yeah, if you guys are interested in Matt and his channel, I will link it down below. Thanks, Matt. It was so fun talking with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I had fun too.
Cool. All right, guys. See you later. Bye. So I had an amazing opportunity to talk with a friend currently living in San Francisco about the current problem that we're all going through. He actually recently returned to the US from South Korea, so he knows better than most people the differences between the two countries and how the governments and leaders are handling the problem. I really think you guys are gonna like this interview. It was really interesting. Let's get into it.
I was in Korea for about 2 weeks. So like February 15th, I arrived in Korea, and there was a very small outbreak, maybe like 20 people. So I was not very concerned about it. And then about 5 days later, it just started to grow exponentially. There definitely seemed to be a lot of anxiety, as I'm sure you're aware.
Oh yeah, I was super paranoid. Didn't want to walk next to anybody or didn't want to take the subway or bus.
That's very understandable. But I definitely felt like everybody was very well prepared. Like even from the time I got to the airport, like I felt like the government was very much on top of it. Or I didn't hear anybody complaining that the system wasn't working, you know, like you walk in the subways there and the loudspeakers will give you instructions about what to do if you feel any sort of symptoms. You know, you call this phone number and you go to a screening center. And while I was there, I met a couple of people that went to screening centers and had their symptoms evaluated and then cleared. And, I was very much looking forward to going back to the US because I wanted a bit of a break from the anxiety that was going on there. I got to the ICN airport and there was some like light screening when I boarded the plane, like that had those like thermal imaging cameras that as you walk by, they can tell if you have a fever. Once I got to the US, there was no screening whatsoever, which surprised me. I walked right through customs and I expected they would want to know like where I'd been, had I been feeling any symptoms, or were you around anybody with any symptoms? Were you in Daegu? Or no, I went through customs and they said, where were you? And I said, I was in South Korea. She said, okay, and then just kept walking.
Wow.
And this was right when like Korea was in the news a lot because it was like the hotspot. I think the main difference is that in the US, people seem very unsure about what this system is doing to protect us. You look at the numbers coming out of Korea every day when they go up, you know, you're pretty confident that those are accurate numbers. They're testing as many people as they can. But here, no one really knows. Like, I think the number is like 70 right now in San Francisco. And I don't think anybody really believes it's 70. It could be 1,000.
So what is the current direction from the leaders over there for normal citizens?
San Francisco and all the surrounding counties ordered all their residents to stay indoors. And only leave for essential reasons. All the businesses except essential businesses were ordered to be closed. So all like the restaurants, bars, they're closed. Grocery stores are open. You can still get takeout food.
So is this for the unforeseeable future, or did they give you any kind of timeline?
It's still April 7th, but it could be extended. They might change it a bit, maybe make it enforce a little bit more forcefully, because it seems like most businesses are finding a way to consider themselves to be essential, and they are open in some capacity. My neighborhood florist was still open with like reduced hours.
You don't think flowers are essential? Are there any penalties for people who are not abiding by this current rule?
Yeah, it is technically a misdemeanor. Yeah, I have seen cops going into businesses, and I assuming they're enforcing it. I haven't heard of any citizens getting in trouble. You are allowed to leave your house for something that's essential, and the list of things that is essential is like pretty big. Technically, going for a walk, it could be essential, like because you need to exercise.
So how about getting food, and like what are people doing if they're going to the mart? Like how is that situation? I've heard and seen pictures of completely empty marts.
I got lucky with the toilet paper because I'm a big believer in buying as much toilet paper as you can fit in your house because why not? You're gonna use it eventually. The supermarkets, like all the non-perishable stuff was gone in the first few days. It's starting to get back to normal now because I don't think there's any real supply chain issues. It's just all people freaking out. I buy a lot of like oatmeal and grains and rice, so I just bought a little bit extra so I would have some extra non-perishables. Just this week, a lot of the grocery stores have started setting aside hours before 9 o'clock for elderly people. So anyone over the age of 60 can go use the grocery store before the general public. I think what happens is like young people go and like take everything, and then the elderly people don't have access to they can't buy toilet paper or perishable goods.
What are the biggest differences that you've been feeling in the energy and the way things are being run in South Korea versus San Francisco and the US?
I mean, the biggest difference was like how South Korea felt fully prepared for what was coming. Being prepared makes all the difference. There's just a feeling of when I'm in the US, we're just making it up as we go. I don't know. I've thinking a lot about it because, you know, culturally, Korea is a little different than the US.
I also think the South Koreans had some practice with this, with other similar issues. They're not going to make the same mistakes. So I think the US will probably follow suit if something else happens along this line.
Yep. Sometimes it takes a huge crisis for positive changes to come.
So what are you, Jonathan, doing these days?
While I was studying Korean, I was watching a lot of YouTube videos to practice with my listening comprehension. I built a website called Caption Pop that allows you to watch YouTube videos, and then I can put the Korean subtitles, but then also the English subtitles below it, and then I can practice that way. That's been very, very helpful for me. I put it online for other people to use as well.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Cool.
Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Happy to help.
Alright, bye-bye.
네, 여러분 지금까지 시청해 주셔서 감사합니다. 저는 션이었습니다. 다음에 또 봐요. 바이.